today is called Pride and Prejudice in Programming, and I'm super excited about it. This is a talk that I thought about a year or two ago, and I was like, wow, that'd be a really good talk. And I shopped it around, and nobody wanted to pick it up. And when I had the opportunity to give a keynote here, I was like, fuck it, I can talk about whatever I want. I'm going to give that talk. So I'm super excited. This is the debut of the talk. If you have constructive feedback at the end, I'd love to hear it. As mentioned, I'm Coraline Ehmke. I call myself a code witch. I once had someone ask me why code witch, and it's like, I write code and I'm literally a witch. As mentioned, I've been doing web development forever. It's actually 25 years now. This was one of my early websites. This is from 1997. And as you can see, it was one of the top 5% of all websites in the world, according to SitePoint. I've been doing open source software since the early 2000s. I created a contributor covenant. We're now up to 100,000 adoptions. Ruby Hero Award, Greater Than Code podcast. My book, CompassionateCoder.com. We have a Patreon. You can support us there. You can sign up for our mailing list and get updates. And we're also giving people who are Patreons early access to some of our chapters. Who likes magic? Raise your hand. Awesome. We're going to do a magic trick. I want you to think of a card, and I want you to hold it in your head very firmly. I want you to visualize it. Close your eyes if it helps you concentrate. Got your card? All right. Is this your card? Oh, magic sucks. I'm just going to give a talk. When you read a good novel, you find yourself imagining what it must feel like to be the protagonist or one of the other characters. Part of getting engaged in a story is understanding the character's feelings and motivations. The characters in a fictional work aren't real, yet we form emotional bonds with them. We watch their stories unfold. We watch them overcome adversity, and we share in their triumphs. Humans have been telling stories to each other for as long as we've had language. Stories are how we share knowledge with each other. But storytelling is not an innate skill, it's something we have to practice. Think about the story that your 5-year-old niece might tell you about a trip to the zoo. It's cute, it's endearing, it's entertaining, but it's probably not a very good story. We have to practice storytelling all our lives, and so much of how we communicate with other people depends on our storytelling abilities. Writing code is just another form of communication. I believe we write code for other humans first and computers second. And we can tell stories with the code that we write. We're imagining a unique world, characters and events and consequences, and we write it all down for others to see. In a way, we're like novelists. We can create our characters, our objects, give them motivations, the intent of our code, and equip them to face their challenges by adding methods and writing tests. When we begin, we don't necessarily know what will happen to them, but we do our best to anticipate their struggles and give them the necessary attributes to overcome adversity. We design their interactions and define their relationships to other objects in the code base. Some of these relationships are strong and others are weak. The strongest or most frequently used objects in our applications are our main characters, and they have a supporting cast of minor objects that work with them to accomplish some goal. If we do our jobs well, the people who read our code will get to know our objects, love them for their strengths, forgive their weaknesses, and join them in the hopes that they're able to overcome adversity to meet their goals. In short, in order to be successful, we have to form emotional bonds with our code and promote these same bonds within the group of our code contributors. Every line of code has a story to tell, from its sketchy beginnings as a spark of an idea in some developer's mind, to the fleshing out of its major features, the exploration of its motives, and the emergent behavior we see when it interacts with other pieces of code in our application. We watch our code rise from humble beginnings and take its part in the larger struggle of solving a problem for ourselves, our companies, or our users. Will our code prevail, or will it succumb to the chaotic forces of the real world as we move it into production? Will its character flaws become strengths in some unforeseeable way, or will they be the cause of its downfall, plagued with bugs and performance issues? We should ask ourselves, what kind of code author do I want to be? At the beginning of my career, I was writing fan fiction. imitating the tone and style of programmers that I admired, and depending on the characters and worlds and plots that better developers than I had created. As I progressed through my career, I gained mastery and began telling my own stories. I learned from more experienced developers by imitating not their style or their characterization, but their discipline. Today, I like to think of myself as a decent code author. I still aspire to greatness, but I recognize that, like a great work of fiction, a great application takes deliberate effort and devotion to my craft over a period of many years. This talk is about what we can learn about writing code from understanding the process of storytelling. There are 5 primary elements of fiction: characterization, plot, setting, and theme. Authors make decisions throughout the writing process related to these elements, and the combination of their choices, along with their talent as a writer, or would make a novel or a story enjoyable or tiresome. Characters are the easiest to understand because they're typically people we can relate to. The plot is the ordering of events in the story, starting from some initial event and moving through phases toward resolution. The setting encompasses the time and place in which the plot takes place. The theme is the overall message of the story, from something as trite as love conquers all to more complex observations about the nature of our relationship to the universe. And finally, style reflects the choices that the writer makes about language, tone, imagery, and organization. And each of these elements are interdependent. A setting with characters and no plot is boring. A compelling story told without style will make readers turn away. An incomprehensible theme will leave the reader wondering what you were trying to say in the first place. So let's explore each of these elements in a relationship to the process that we as developers follow to write code that tells a story. Designing a software system and its underlying architecture is a complex process. In a sense, we're creating a microcosm of the larger world in which we all exist. We're deciding on the salient features and components of actual reality that we need to model in our software. And that's sort of like world building. Every novelist engages in the process of world building to some degree. It's about constructing an imaginary world with coherent qualities, history, geography, ecology, and even sometimes the basic laws of physics. The world building approach to fiction was popularized by science fiction and fantasy authors, and it's a departure from many centuries of traditional storytelling. Rather than focusing on following a character through multiple stories, world building sets as its goal the creation of an environment that can sustain multiple characters in multiple stories. And this resonates with me as a software developer. The architecture of my application, including the decisions that I make about what's present in the system, is to a large degree the practice of creating an alternate reality. Objects in the software system may sometimes correspond to objects in the real world, like a car or a ticket or a package, where they may correspond to intangible ideas like exchange rates or shipping methods. But in either case, they're simplified constructions that are used to create a microcosm of the real world. Their interactions are defined by the methods that we implement on them, how we couple them, and their APIs. This is akin to defining the physics of the world of our system. Our system design creates and populates the world in which our characters, our objects and components and subsystems act. Architecture is essentially the act of world building. Good world building creates a consistent environment for fictional stories to play out. Good software creates a consistent environment for user stories to play out. There are multiple approaches to world building, just as there are multiple approaches to architecting a system. A novelist may start from the top and work her way down, creating an overview of the world, defining things like the kind of creatures that inhabit the world, sketching out the broad strokes of its history. The process continues in an iterative manner, and the world develops in increasing levels of detail. I've observed the same top-down or bottom-up dichotomy in the design of software systems as well. Some engineers, myself included, start with a big picture understanding of the application that needs to be built. We see the shape of what is needed, understand its general purpose, and sketch out its initial architecture. Then we start drilling down into the details, figuring out our object model, defining our core APIs, and thinking about how the different parts of the system will interoperate. We may start building at this point, securing the knowledge that the general outline of the application that we're working on is understood. Alternatively, the writer may start by defining a small part of the world, only as much as is needed for the story to begin. She may focus on a single location, for example, or a single culture. She'll go into great detail, creating living and dead individuals and figuring out how they relate to each other. As the action of the story moves around, the process will be repeated for additional locations or cultures or groups. Some engineers start with the fine details. This is bottom-up architecture. They may consider the central data models in the application, the real workhorses, and define their attributes and initial sets of methods. As they work, the division of responsibilities becomes self-evident, and they organize their code into hierarchies, extract common functionality in the modules or traits or interfaces, and define service boundaries. As they work, a larger system starts to gel from the small components that they're assembling. Just as in world building, the bottom-up approach can lead to some inconsistencies, but by delivering in small chunks, it's anticipated that most mistakes can be dealt with as they become apparent. So the overall architecture of the application we're building is the setting for the story's action. The functional components of the architecture define the laws of reality to which the action is constrained, and the modules and objects that we define are the supporting cast of characters. In a novel, the theme is basically the message that the author is trying to convey through the story. The theme of your application is a promise that you're making to your users, the thing that will attract them in the first place. All of the other elements of the story you tell with your code are in service to the overarching theme. The main theme is the lesson you're trying to impart to the user. It's your value proposition. The theme of your application may be, it can be easy to connect with your friends by sharing casual photographs, or you have the ability to efficiently manage your tasks with a to-do list. There are also themes that you use to communicate with your collaborators in the code base. They reflect the core principles that you use to create, extend, and maintain your application. The technical theme of your application comprises its underlying architectural principles, the logical model, your testing strategy, and the particulars of your deployment process. Together, these aspects of the application convey a message to your fellow developers, encapsulating the values of the entire team. Taking time to develop your theme in advance is a good practice to follow. Even in an agile environment with rapid iterations and incremental delivery, you should know the theme of your application and ensure that every feature you add or every tool that you add to the tool chain stays true to your theme. Over the course of the development of your application, just like the development of a story, you as the author need to keep the underlying theme in mind. Everything that you do, every model that you design, every process that you put in place must serve your overarching theme. If your theme gets watered down, the story becomes muddied. You're no longer communicating in a consistent way with your users or your collaborators. What is the plot of our application? There's probably an overarching story comprised of the goals that we enable a user to achieve to create some desired outcome. Responding to a tweet on their timeline with a clever retort, managing a budget, or queuing up and enjoying their favorite music. The main plot, in short, is the purpose of the application that we're building. But there are many subplots as well. Managing a budget, for example, takes dozens of small actions, from connecting the program to our bank account, to classifying transactions, to viewing reports. We have to manage these smaller actions in a way that's consistent with the greater story to provide a coherent experience for our users. Every subplot is composed of an action and a reaction. In a novel, an event is described, and characters respond to that event in some way that's consistent with their motivations. The subplot is structured as a scene, the context in which something takes place, and a sequel, which is the reaction to the action, a sort of regrouping of the elements of the story. In a software application, subplot events happen all the time. Alerts pop up, streams are updated with new content, or a user moves to the next screen in a wizard workflow. Our code has to respond to these events and the user's reaction to them in a predictable way to maintain the coherence of the plot. Most plot points involve some form of adversity or obstacle. If our characters include our classes and components, an obstacle may be reflected in the constraints of the system that they're part of, the capabilities of the language that we're using, the limitations of an interface. We must provide a means of working within these constraints to overcome the obstacle and achieve a resolution. To keep the user experience consistent, we need to manage the subplots in a way that's consistent and respects the constraints of the scenes in which they appear. This means paying attention to the small details and always focusing on consistency. We can also use this model to filter out features that maybe don't belong in our application. If a user story doesn't support the overall plot, why is it there? Do I really need to upload an image to my bank account from my profile? Do I need to connect my media player to Facebook? If the feature isn't going to move users toward their goal, it's a distraction. It detracts from the overall plot. It's goal plating. Our connection to a novel is tied to the success or failure of the author in creating believable characters. Believable characters have traits or attributes that define their capabilities and limitations, which are then explored in the context of a world that presents obstacles for them to overcome. They're further defined by their relationship with other characters, some with opposing motivations. A novelist can't write a compelling story without understanding and exploring the motivations of her characters. I would argue that we can't write compelling applications without asking the same questions of our code. Our user model is not as complex as a real person. We only care about certain aspects of the user's personhood. We define the operating characteristics of our model, create an overall logical structure that models a salient subset of the world. To define the motivation of our code requires a good understanding of the problem we're trying to solve. In a novel, the character's motivation may stem from some change they're trying to make in the world. Similarly, we're trying to make some change in a relatively small-scale model of the world that is embodied in our software system, and the models that we populate with it are the mechanisms for affecting that change. Have you ever been in a situation where you look at a piece of code and know who wrote it, even without using Git blame? Every writer adopts a writing style in the process of creating their story. The writing style includes decisions about grammar and word usage, tone and imagery, and even big picture considerations such as the point of view from which a story is written. Good writers are able to adapt their writing style to the work at hand, but there remain consistent elements that are the hallmark of a given author. Imagine if halfway through a novel, the writer made a change to their writing style. They changed from short, punchy exchanges of dialogue to dramatic monologues spanning several pages. They shift the point of view from the first-person perspective of the main character to a third-person view of the action. Where once the vocabulary that was used was relatively simple, the descriptions of places and people and actions suddenly draw on a pool of 25-cent words. This would be jarring for you as the reader and would distract from your enjoyment. It would be a sign of bad writing. The style chosen for writing code and tasks needs to be also consistent throughout your application. This is significantly harder since we probably have multiple teammates with their own idiosyncratic methods that they use to write code at different times. So how do you keep the tone and grammar and usage consistent? One approach adopted by many companies is a style guide. We seem to have an innate recognition of code that is written in a canonical way. We have certain expectations of how Go programs are structured. We want to be consistent in our use of protocols in a Swift application. Ruby methods that return Boolean values generally end with a question mark. But these are unwritten standards informed by our reading of code by other developers. Having consistent style is important for keeping code readable and also impacts the ramp-up time for new developers. A style guide ensures consistency in the code that's added to an app. It codifies what it means for code to be canonical, enforcing standards like snake case for variable names or shout case for constants. Style guides add a level of verification on top of the messages we get from our compilers or runtime interpreters, ensuring the code as it is written conforms to agreed upon standards. Most languages have linters, tools that scan the code base for violations of a carefully considered representation of the style guide. Some linters make small style changes automatically, like adding a blank line at the end of a file. In Ruby, many companies adopt the use of the GitHub style guide and use a library called Rubocop to enforce it. JavaScript has linters like Prettier and ES Formatter, and Python has Pyland and Flake8. The Go language sidesteps the issue altogether, with most IDEs integrating with a package called Go format that enforces the standard approach to writing in that language. It's important that we take time to understand the characters in our code base. You may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a popular theory of human motivation proposed by American psychologist Abraham Maslow in the 1940s. The hierarchy is generally presented in a pyramid with the most basic needs at the bottom and increasingly complex needs as you ascend upward. Writers sometimes use the hierarchy of needs to pin down the essential conflict between their characters and the world in which they live. Is the character destitute? If so, she may be focused on meeting her physical needs for food and shelter. Is she pursuing a relationship? Then the conflict will center on meeting her social needs for love and belonging. Is she a hero of epic proportion? Her conflict may involve using all her skills and talents to save the universe from sure destruction. But how does the hierarchy apply to the components of our system? It helps us understand the motivations and demands of the code that we're writing. Let's compare the traditional hierarchy of needs against what a hierarchy of needs might look like in the software world. Physical needs form the base of Maslow's pyramid. These include the need for food and shelter and sleep, the basic stuff of staying alive. In the software hierarchy, we have data consistency. Data is the lifeblood of a software system. When we feed our system data, we're providing for its physical needs. Consistent access to data, whether it's the contents of a file, a JSON response from an API, or terabytes of machine learning training data, is the bare minimum that our programs need to be viable. Data is the lifeblood of a software system. For some programs, that's enough. A Unix program like ls does very little but read from the file source, so its job is very simple. Many scripts are going to be like this, operating on a limited set of data and producing some kind of output. For more complex programs, reliable data operations form only the first of a series of requirements for success, but the data need is fundamental. Preserving customer data, providing high availability, ensuring consistent access. That's the most basic need of a mature software product. If you fail to meet your system's needs at this level, little else will matter. Next on Maslow's hierarchy are our safety needs. With the whole food situation squared away, we need to protect ourselves from bodily or emotional harm to make our lives more stable. Safety can be thought of in multiple dimensions: the safety of the program, the safety of the computer it runs on, the safety of the user. Exception handling is an example of program safety that must be considered for a healthy app. Security features are also a key component of safety. If your program accidentally allows arbitrary code execution or SQL injection, you're not meeting its need for safety. For a user, safety means different things. Authentication, identity management, and anti-harassment features all feature in this category. If your program has users, their safety should be a paramount concern. And thanks to initiatives like GDPR and the European Union, there can even be legal requirements for ensuring a minimum level of user safety. Safety is a broad concern. It can be anything from password management algorithms to admin controls to prevent bad actors from creating a negative environment. It's a critical need, but it's one that gets overlooked in a lot of systems. Naive developers may create forms that allow the execution of JavaScript to steal cookies. Bank websites may have arbitrary password link limitations. Social media sites have a terrible track record for protecting their users from harassment and abuse. All of these things result from programmers not spending enough time focusing on the safety needs of their applications. Our social needs focus on inner well-being, which encompasses our relationships with other people and our sense of self. The way we link our classes through relations or inheritance, our components through services and interfaces, are a form of establishing relationships that meet the social needs of our code. Our architectures all involve interactions between different objects. To meet the basic social needs of our application, we have to work to ensure that every component has a well-thought-out API, exposing just enough to be useful, but not so much that classes become entangled. Several years ago, I created a Ruby gem called Society, which analyzes coupling between classes. This is what its output looks like. It's essentially a social graph of Ruby applications. It explicitly reveals relationships inherent in our applications by diagramming relationships and method passing between different classes. Having a social graph of our components can be very revealing. Clustering of coupling might indicate that a class is too chatty or reveals too many intimate details of its life, or we might use the centrality as a data point considering a service extraction. Status needs arise once we've established our sense of belonging. They motivate us to become more accomplished and take pride in ourselves. Just as status needs for people motivate us to advance our social standing, status needs for code reflect opportunities to give certain parts of our system more prominence. In practical terms, that may mean targeting a particular class or subsystem for refactoring. Through refactoring, we strive to improve the code's performance and comprehensibility without changing its identity or function. It will probably still present the same face to the world, but we elevate it to a higher level of quality to bring it up to standards. Not every corner of the code base has status needs. Rarely executed methods, even though they may strike us as overly complex or show signs of repeated hacks, may not deserve the boost in status they would get from refactoring. Rather, we focus our refactoring efforts on critical parts of the system whose standing can be improved by the gift of our attention. This is how we avoid spreading ourselves too thin. We identify those areas with status needs and focus our efforts on meeting them in a comprehensive and efficient way. Finally, with self-actualization, we're in a place to pursue our dreams and become our best selves. The parts of our program that allow a user to create something new or novel through an interface or workflow enable self-actualization, which in this sense is the empowerment that comes from direct interaction with the end user. Sadly, this is another area where many developers fail to meet the needs of their programs. Because of the design of interfaces and workflows is a specialized discipline and one that many programmers who focus on low-level details don't have much experience with. This is where a healthy organization makes an investment in dedicated UI and UX experts. The most clever and well-written program will probably fail if its users don't have a good experience interacting with it. UI and UX experts ensure that the hard work that we as programmers put into our system pays off for the user. Meeting the needs of the user is the ultimate attainment for a piece of software. Knowing the needs of our main characters helps an author create a compelling and realistic story. Knowing what kind of need the component that we're working on helps us write compelling applications. A structure like this can ensure that we meet and understand the needs of our programs in an effective and almost empathetic way. As developers, we tend to specialize in writing code for one or maybe two levels in this pyramid, and that's fine. We just need to recognize that we can't necessarily meet all of the needs ourselves, and that it's not just okay, but also better in the long run to ask for help in making our programs healthy and successful. Some people write for themselves, just like some people code for themselves, but for most of us, we want our work to be well received by people in the real world. And keeping our minds focused on the needs and wants of our audience throughout the entire process, being thoughtful and deliberate about the story we're creating for them, is an important factor in the success of our work. Note that the title of this slide is Empathy with the Reader. That's an important idea we're going to explore in a moment. A novelist spends a lot of time relating to an idealized reader. She tries to anticipate the reaction that her readers will have and uses her art to lay out paths to emotional connections. As software developers, we think about the features we're developing in terms of idealized users. And we too need to carefully create opportunities for making real connections with our users. The word for that kind of connection is empathy. Empathy is a really overloaded term. It can mean different things to different people. And sometimes we think we're practicing empathy when we're really not. In the book, The Compassionate Coder, that I'm writing with Naomi Freeman, we have a concept we call the empathy spectrum. At the beginning of the spectrum is apathy, no connection to others. Consider the conservative political movement, the Republican Party in the US. A large part of their platform is anti-immigrant, anti-trans, anti-gay. They classify people who fit into those categories as the other, and they don't extend empathy toward them. They extend empathy toward people who look like them, think like them, and have the same values. They've made a conscious decision to reserve empathy for one group and deny it to another group. What does apathy look like in software? Consider the IRS website. The fundamental interaction between a US citizen and the IRS is filing taxes. What's the one thing you cannot do on the IRS website? The creators of that website are not extending empathy to their users. Next in the spectrum is narcissism, where self obliterates the other. This is about centering yourself as opposed to opening yourself up to the lived experiences of other people. People with privilege often fall into this category. When we're telling stories, it's easy to misidentify this as empathy because it involves self and others, and it appears on the surface to seek understanding of the others. But if we're not careful, this can lead to othering. Consider a situation in which a marginalized person tells you something about their experience, and you say, I guess I have more privilege than you do. What you've just done is centered yourself and your feelings over the lived experience of other people, which is narcissism. Inserting our egos into our code is also a form of narcissism. In fiction, this is called the Mary Sue effect, the author writing herself into the role of the main character. If we center ourselves, we don't allow the story to progress in a natural way. We bend the plot to our own whims. We don't leave room for collaborators, coworkers to add value. This sort of narcissism might be fine for a toy project, but serious applications cannot abide egoism. That's not to say that we shouldn't make code a natural reflection of our own values. Removing ourselves entirely from the code base is a form of codependence, wherein we let the software eclipse our true nature and don't give ourselves fully to the work. We see the Mary Sue effect a lot in technology. How many apps are there for your iPhone or Android phone that are designed for well-to-do white guys in San Francisco? How many applications of facial recognition software only work on the white males from the training data? And now we have self-driving cars that are programmed to avoid white people, but not people of color. The Mary Sue effect can literally kill. Twitter is a great example of narcissism in software. Twitter treats its users as a commodity. Engagement is the only metric that matters to them. If that means tolerating Nazis, then so be it. User safety takes a backseat to the company's goals of monetization at all costs. Next on the spectrum is codependence. It's a loaded word, and it's not one that a lot of us would immediately identify with because it has negative connotations. I'd like to define codependence this way: consistent rescuing behavior, allowing the needs of other people to obliterate our own needs. In this position, we need to differentiate between accepting and forgiving versus understanding and holding someone accountable. People with trauma often fall into the codependence category. Consider this story. A boss yells at you for any minor infraction. They give you more work than you can possibly complete within a day, with the expectation it'll be done at the end of the sprint. One day, the workload causes you to miss a good friend's birthday party. Your friend asks where you were, and you explain. And they say, "I cannot believe your boss. What kind of person does that?" And you respond with, "They can't help it. They're under a lot of stress. They have a really complicated life, and their job is really tough. I get it. What can you do?" And your friend might say you're being too empathetic. You may not realize it, but you're probably pleased with yourself in this moment. There's a hero complex at work. It's the hallmark of codependence. You're the only one who can save your boss from himself. Your self-sacrifice creates greater good. The friend in this situation is partially correct. Most people would not put up with that behavior, but they're incorrect in calling you too empathetic. Obliteration of the self in service to the other is not empathy. Finding purpose and self-esteem through self-sacrifice to satisfy someone else's need is codependency, not empathy. Uber is a great example of codependency in software. Uber puts the needs of its customers before its own needs. It's not profitable. It has abysmal working conditions for its drivers, and it has a well-known, well-documented hostile culture for developers, especially women, Black people, and people of color. True empathy is an open exchange, honest and understanding, shifting perspectives between self and the other, emotional regulation, maintaining boundaries. It's the opposite of apathy, and it requires expanding the definition and recognition of our own needs to recognize the needs of other people as well. Basecamp is a great example of an application that embodies true empathy. It's a profitable business, and it's also responsible for creating one of the most accessible and powerful web application frameworks in the world, Ruby on Rails. They gave it away for free. They open sourced it. Open source at its best is a great expression of empathy. You expand the notion of self, developers, to encompass the users who would otherwise be othered. Everyone's needs are met, and everyone wins. What does empathy for the reader look like? Not killing off beloved characters for no reason, not overindulging in unnecessarily violent scenes, the free exchange of goodwill for the reader and the reader's goodwill toward the author. Empathy for the user is also a two-way interaction. Developers must make their programs functional across a wide range of devices, old and new, internet connections from blazingly fast to painfully slow, and interfaces that work just as well for able people as people with disabilities. In exchange, Users will demonstrate their emotional connection through sharing on social media, software reviews, bug reports, and feature requests. Even bug reports can be a form of empathetic exchange, and if it's not, it might be a sign of a larger problem. We often think of books as the result of the work of an isolated genius, but just as in software, in truth, there are many people involved. There may be a co-author, there will be an editor, there may be a publisher, there's a designer who makes typographical and layout decisions, the cover artist. Writing a book has its solitary moments, but it requires seamless teamwork of a group of professionals to actually manifest something that a reader can get their hands on. As I said in my introduction, I'm currently co-authoring a book on empathy. Working with a co-author can be difficult at times, but it also has a tremendous impact on the quality of my writing. Having a co-author that I trust means that we can leverage each other's strengths. We can keep each other focused. We can talk through content decisions, style decisions, structural decisions. It's not that different from pair programming. When you pair and you get stuck, your partner can take over or help you talk through the problem. It's a collaborative effort, and the result is something stronger and more consistent than we could produce on our own. As your book gets to the final draft, you may engage the services of an editor. The editor looks at your work with a critical eye. The only context they have is the words that you committed to paper. Their understanding of your work is a preview of what the larger world will react to your work. They work with you to refine the story, work out inconsistencies, and add polish. They serve the same role that a code review does when you think about it. They're not gatekeepers who make arbitrary decisions, but rather they have a vested interest in helping you succeed. Beyond the words that you've written is consideration for how the reader will experience your work, or how the user will experience your work. If you're writing a book, you rely on designers to make choices about typography and illustrations and the all-important cover. If you're writing an application, you rely on UI and UX and accessibility experts to make choices that will directly affect how your users experience the work. The publisher is the ultimate decision maker. Publishers put their reputation on the line and exercise their resources and influence to make sure that your book finds an audience. This isn't that different from working with managers and stakeholders and business partners. It's a symbiotic relationship. You need them to put the code out in the world, and they need you to produce it. Writing a book, writing a program. In both cases, it's a group effort that requires empathy, compassion, and a dedication to quality. As developers, we're responsible for the stories that we create. If our setting, the underlying architecture of the application, is consistent and rich, it can accommodate a varied cast of characters spanning multiple workflows. A coherent theme ensures that collaborators can contribute to the work in a meaningful way and that our users will be confused by too many distractions. If the supporting cast of our underlying models and components are properly designed and motivated, they support the main character and help them resolve their conflicts, overcome their obstacles, and let the reader or user reach the end of the story in a satisfying way. Consistent style makes our code easier to work with and extend. Finally, if we have understood our characters' motivations and created a way for them to overcome adversity and obstacles to meet their goals, we have the makings of a successful story. We, as developers, create and maintain the thread, the narrative of our applications. To create the opportunity for an emotional connection between our users and our application, between our teammates and our code base, we have to write code with empathy at the forefront. If we don't care about the code we're writing, or we separate our feelings from the work, we're operating in an environment of apathy. And apathetic code is lifeless. Instead, we should strive for a balance, a healthy emotional relationship with our code and ourselves as equal partners. Our dedication to empathy and our capability to practice it on every level as we write is what distinguishes us as creators. One thing I've kind of avoided in this whole talk is answering the question, who is the main character? Our user class is a proxy for the actual human user. If we do our jobs right, the actual user will identify with this proxy and see their needs and desires and struggles reflected in it over the course of the story of our application. This requires cultivating a balanced, empathetic relationship between the producers of the application and its users. Personally, I want my user model to be the Elizabeth Bennet of all user models, a killer combination of wit and resolve and compassion. I want her to navigate the story of my application with grace and dignity and inner strength and ultimately fulfill her destiny. And I hold out the hope that one day I'll write a classic that will be admired by fellow developers and users alike. I aspire to be the Jane Austen of programming. I want to weave the pride and prejudice of applications, create a compelling story that propels its characters forward, triumphing over adversity and allowing their users to become their best selves. I believe in telling stories. I believe that by being thoughtful and deliberate and empathetic, we can all become amazing storytellers, even when we're coding. I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell you this story, and I hope that I've inspired you to go and write something beautiful. Thank you.